You got me all excited now that my historical stuff is coming.
You're going to geek out. No, I'm all
Yeah.
for it. Because my understanding was that he wanted to make the world look at France, particularly himself, as the center of the universe or the center of the world. He called himself the Sun King, right?
Right. Yes and no. So, I just started this recording after we kind of started the conversation because I didn't realize we were going to go into this rabbit hole, but we did. Dad's watching Versailles based off my recommendation. If you see Versailles, I definitely recommend it. It's on Netflix.
You gotta get past the raunchy stuff, and
Versailles is very sexual. It's very there is a little goriness to it, but it's mostly sexual. So I highly recommend you watch it on Netflix without children around. With that stated, Versailles is very also historically accurate because every time I watched it, I was like, there's no way. And I Googled the crap out of the information and I was like, well, they got it pretty close to accurate. That's actually surprising. You're talking about why was Versailles created? Well, first of all, you started with Louis the 14th. Keep in mind, France ended its monarchy at Louis the 16th, which was just shortly after the American Revolution.
Right. Storming of the Bastille.
Right. Louis the 14th was not far, but kind of before that. I want to say late 1600s, realistically speaking. And Dad just said he's the longest living monarch of history. I'm like, no way. And he told me 72 years and 110 days. The current longest living monarch that I know of is from England. And that is currently Elizabeth II at 70 years. She just hit her platinum jubilee. So that gives her about 2.5 roughly years until she can potentially take over that title as the longest serving monarch. What you pointed out,
not just she is in Britain, but we're talking worldwide.
Yeah. What you pointed out was Louis the 14th probably took over at like 4 or 5. I don't remember his exact age.
He was just under 5.
Just under 5. Okay. And that makes sense because he was probably just pampered and kind of handled more than anything until he hit of age.
Advised.
Which is a BS conversation anyway, because they really, when it came to, especially back then, they truly handled. You think presidents and everybody get handled now. They got handled a whole lot then. Anywho, speaking of that though, I asked Dad, I said, what was the creation of Versailles? Which Versailles, if anybody's not familiar, is the French palace of the French monarchy. And it resulted in what Louis XVI lived in until essentially the end of his days, until he was guillotined to death. Louis the 14th, and
I thought he lived in Vincennes. Versailles, no. They abandoned Versailles right after King Louis the 14th for a while.
And then
resurrected it.
They lived in Versailles until, if I remember correctly, again, they lived in Versailles until the whole revolution occurred, and then they'd abandoned it. And they only abandoned it for a short time, and then they caught the royal family, and they killed Louis the 16th. They guillotined him to death, and then eventually they took over. They took his wife and they guillotined her to death.
Right.
When they captured the royal family, that's where you get the famous quote, well, if they don't have bread, give them cake. That was really the ultimate.
They were out of touch.
Yes, exactly. Absolute out of touch of what real life is like. But Louis the 14th, even though, yes, I didn't realize he took over the monarchy officially at that young of an age, but it makes sense because at about that age, I don't know if his family was killed during a raid or whatnot, but his family was in Paris at that time. They had bombarded the royal family with a riot of some sort, much like the storming of the Bastille. And he was so scared to death that he would potentially get hurt and harmed and killed by the peasants that he moved everybody to Versailles, which was, like you stated, the hunting lodge of the royal family. It was very small. The land was everywhere, but the hunting lodge itself was very small. So as he grew up, what they did was they expanded that hunting lodge into the palace that is Versailles today. And so because of that, they created that. They created that's honest to God, that's one of my things on my bucket list. I would love to go to France just to see it and experience it, because they took a small hunting lodge And of course, back then, a small hunting lodge was 3 stories,
Right.
three
Yeah.
stories,
Big
and
stone.
probably 3,600 feet, but it was still massive back then. And they took that and they created it into what it is today. And the most impressive part of the whole thing was not only the gardens. If you look at the holistic structure of the architecture of Versailles, it's the gardens. It really truly is the gardens. It brings you outside to
The
experience,
fountains, the
yes,
whole
the
works.
experience, the fountains, the flowers and everything like that. But then on top of that, the thing that really grabs your attention is the Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah.
And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to take you and make you feel little and other than the king, because you will walk through the Hall of Mirrors before you see the king. And the expectation was you would look at the mirrors and make sure you are straight, you look tidy, you are proper, everything is in place prior to seeing the king. And just like you said, Louis the 14th was called the Sun King. There's multiple reasons for that. Two, the first one, he wore high heels. Back then, it was not a thing of, women wore high heels, men wore whatever. He wore high heels to elevate himself above everybody else. Then, second, he was the Sun King because he had I don't remember what the term is called, but he had if I remember correctly, it showed in Versailles briefly a couple of times. There was a process every morning. He would wake up. There would be a staff awaiting his wake up, and they would assist him through the entire wake up process. And he was stark ass naked. There's no such thing when it comes to royalty. There's no such thing as privacy, man. What they did was they brought him up, they dressed him, they bathed him, they took him to the next station, they prepared him for the day, clothed him, primped him, as in hair, everything, made sure all things were in place, and then they let him go throughout the day. And that could take, I don't know what the process was, but if I remember correctly, 30 minutes to an hour. But every day, same time as the sun arose, the Sun King was awoken to fulfill his daily duties. And it's crazy. They took a small hunting lodge and they incorporated it into this massive palace that they have today. And it was all based off of what they had at the time. It's crazy.